25 years. It's a lifetime. For a crime I didn't commit, I paid with my youth, my name, my future. They took everything from me based on a lie, and the steel doors that slammed shut behind me echoed for a quarter of a century. I was 22 when they convicted me of killing Sarah, the woman I loved. I became inmate number 734, a ghost haunting the corridors of a maximum security prison, my pleas of innocence lost in the cacophony of a system that had already made up its mind. Every sunrise was a reminder of another day stolen. Every sunset, a prelude to another night filled with the faces of the jury, the judge, and the man who put me there, my one-time friend, Mark. When I was finally exonerated, thanks to a small underfunded innocence project that found a flaw in the forensic timeline, there were no triumphant headlines, no heartfelt apologies from the state, just a cheap suit, a bus ticket, and a world I no longer recognized. The vibrant colors of the 90s had faded into the sleek, cold gloss of the 21st century. Cars were silent, phones were glass screens, and everyone was connected to something invisible, yet I had never felt more disconnected. That's the story you think you know. But the real story, the one that matters, started on a Tuesday morning under the fluorescent hum of a Walmart. I was in the coffee aisle, trying to decide between two brands, a simple choice that felt like an impossible luxury. That's when I heard it. A laugh. It wasn't just any laugh. It was a sound I had replayed in my nightmares for 9,125 days. A cold, familiar cackle that froze the blood in my veins. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. And there he was, Mark, the real killer. He was alive, free, and smiling, living the life that should have been mine. The face that had haunted my every waking and sleeping moment was now just a few feet away, debating over a box of cereal. This is the story of a monstrous injustice, and the moment fate handed me a choice. Expose him, confront him, or simply walk away. Because when the system fails you, sometimes life itself gives you a chance to rebalance the scales, in ways no one ever sees coming. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. If my journey resonates with you, a quiet subscription to the channel would mean the world. My first few months of freedom were a blur of disorientation. I found a small, dingy apartment on the edge of town, where the walls were thin, and the smell of damp lingered in the air. For the first week, I slept on the floor, because a mattress felt too soft, too foreign. The silence was the hardest part. Prison is never quiet. It's a constant symphony of clanging metal, shouts and despair. My apartment was a vacuum, and the silence was so profound it felt like it was pressing in on me, suffocating me with the ghosts of my past. I needed a routine, something to anchor me to this new reality. I got a job stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store, working the graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was perfect. The nights were quiet, and my interactions were minimal. I was a phantom, restocking chips and canned beans while the city slept. My parole officer, a weary man named Henderson, told me to keep my head down. "You're free, Jack," he'd said, not unkindly, but the world has a long memory. Don't give anyone a reason to look twice at you. I took his advice to heart. I became invisible. I wore grey or black hoodies, kept my gaze fixed on the pavement, and spoke only when necessary. My life was a monotonous loop. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. I was rebuilding, but what I was building felt less like a life, and more like a shelter to hide in. The bitterness was a constant companion, a sour taste at the back of my throat. I'd see a young couple holding hands and feel a pang of phantom pain for Sarah, for the life we were supposed to have. I'd see a father teaching his son to ride a bike, and mourn the children I would never have. The trial was a constant reel playing in my mind. The prosecution painted me as a jealous boyfriend, and Mark, my so-called best friend, was their star witness. I can still see him on the stand, his voice thick with fake emotion, telling the jury how I had a dark side. He'd looked right at me, a single tear rolling down his cheek, sealing my fate. He was the one who found her. He was the one who called the police. He played the part of the grieving friend perfectly, all while knowing he was the monster who took her from this world. The evidence was all circumstantial, but his testimony, his betrayal, was what convinced them. I tried to let it go. I really did. I told myself that holding on to the anger would only keep me shackled to the past. Freedom wasn't just about being outside of a cell. It was about freeing my mind from the prison of hatred. I was starting to believe it was possible. I was starting to find a fragile peace in the anonymity of my new existence. I was just a guy stocking shelves, a man with no past and no future. And then came that Tuesday morning at Walmart. I'd run out of coffee, and the simple act of buying more was about to shatter the delicate truce I had made with my life. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something that tested the very core of who you are? Comment below, and if you're finding value in my story, please leave a like. It helps more than you know. The fluorescent lights of the Walmart hummed with an indifferent drone. The air smelled of popcorn and floor cleaner. It was the epitome of mundane American life, a world I was still struggling to rejoin. I stood there frozen, the generic red box of coffee grounds clutched in my hand. My mind was a maelstrom of shock and white-hot rage. It was him, Mark. He looked older, of course. We all were. His hair was thinning, and a soft paunch pushed against his polo shirt. He was standing next to a shopping cart, and in the seat was a little girl with blonde pigtails, happily babbling away. A woman, presumably his wife, stood beside him, laughing at something he said. They looked happy, normal, a perfect family tableau in the cereal aisle. He was holding a box of Lucky Charms, pointing out the colorful marshmallows to his daughter. The sheer domesticity of the scene was a gut punch. This man, this monster, had a family. He had a life filled with laughter and sugary cereal. A life he'd built on top of my stolen one. My first instinct was primal. It was a roar that started deep in my gut, a desire to cross the 10 feet between us and wipe that smug, content smile off his face. I wanted to scream his name. I wanted the entire store to turn and look at the man who let his friend rot in a cage for a crime he committed. My knuckles were white as I gripped the coffee box, the cardboard edges digging into my palm. I could feel 25 years of suppressed fury boiling to the surface, threatening to erupt like a volcano. But then the voice of Henderson, my parole officer, echoed in my head. Don't give anyone a reason to look twice at you. If I caused a scene, if I laid a hand on him, I knew exactly what would happen. I'd be the one in handcuffs. I was the ex-con, the man with a violent crime on his record. No matter the exoneration, he was the respectable family man. No one would believe me. I would be right back in a cell, and this time, they'd throw away the key for good. I ducked behind a towering display of tortilla chips, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I peeked through a gap in the bags, watching him. He placed the cereal in the cart, ruffled his daughter's hair, and shared a kiss with his wife. Every normal, loving gesture was a dagger twisting in my soul. I needed to think. I needed to be smart. The system had failed me once. I couldn't trust it to deliver justice now, not based on the word of a ghost like me. I abandoned my own cart and began to follow them, keeping a safe distance. I moved like I had learned to move in prison, silently, always aware of my surroundings, melting into the background. I shadowed them through the home goods section, past the pharmacy, and into the toy aisle. I watched as he patiently helped his daughter pick out a doll. The sight of his gentle hands, the same hands that had taken Sarah's life, now carefully placing a doll in the cart, made me feel physically ill. I was no longer just angry. The rage was coalescing into something colder, sharper, a purpose. For 25 years, I had been a passive victim of his actions. Now, I was an active observer. The power dynamic had shifted, even if he didn't know it yet. He was no longer just a ghost in my nightmares. He was a man of flesh and blood, a man with a routine, a family, and a life that could be unraveled. They finally made their way to the checkout. I hung back by the magazine rack, pretending to read, my eyes tracking their every move. I listened as he made small talk with the cashier, his voice the same smooth, confident tone he'd used on the witness stand. He paid with a credit card, and I memorized the name on it. Mark Peterson. He had kept his name. The audacity was breathtaking. I followed them out into the sprawling parking lot. The midday sun was bright, making me squint after the artificial light of the store. They loaded their groceries into a new-looking family minivan. I saw him strap his daughter into her car seat, his movements practiced and tender. It was the ultimate insult. He got to be a father. He got to have all of it. As they drove away, I pulled out the cheap, prepaid phone I owned and took a picture of his license plate. The image was a little blurry, but the numbers were clear. I stood there for a long time in that parking lot, the engine's hum fading into the distance, leaving me alone with the roar of my own thoughts. Walking away wasn't an option. Forgetting wasn't an option. For the first time since my release, I wasn't just a survivor, I was a hunter, and my prey had just revealed himself. The blurry image of that license plate became my Rosetta Stone. Back in the sanctuary of my small apartment, I felt a surge of adrenaline I hadn't experienced in decades. This was no longer about passive survival, it was about active pursuit. The first step was information. In prison, information was currency, traded in whispers and furtive glances. Out here, it was all just a few clicks away. I went to the public library, not daring to use my home's traceable Wi-Fi. Sitting at a sticky computer terminal, surrounded by students and the unemployed, I began to dig. A simple license plate search on a public records website, paid for with a few dollars from a prepaid gift card, gave me his full name, Mark Allen Peterson, and an address. It was in a suburb on the other side of the city, a place with manicured lawns and two-car garages, a world away from my crumbling apartment building. From there, the digital breadcrumbs were easy to follow. I found his Facebook profile. It was public. The profile picture was the family from the Walmart: Mark, his wife Susan, and their daughter Emily. His page was a curated gallery of the American dream, photos from a Disney World vacation, a proud post about his company, Peterson Construction, sponsoring a local Little League team, a video of him giving a toast at a friend's wedding, looking charismatic and beloved. It was a life built on a foundation of lies, and I scrolled through it with a mixture of nausea and fascination. I knew I couldn't rely on the police. Walking into a station and saying, "The guy who really committed the murder 25 years ago is a successful contractor living in the suburbs," would get me laughed out of the room, or worse, put on a harassment watch list. I had been exonerated, but the stench of prison clings to you. I needed more than a story. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof that the system couldn't ignore this time. My hunt began. I started by observing. I would take a bus to his neighborhood late at night, walking the quiet, tree-lined streets, a ghost in the dark. I learned his routine. He left for work every morning at 7:15 a.m., in a large company truck. Susan took Emily to school around 8:30 a.m. He frequented a sports bar called The Dugout on Friday evenings with his construction buddies. Every piece of information was a small victory, a chip in the armor of his perfect life. But it wasn't enough. I needed something that connected him directly to that night. I spent hours poring over old news articles about the case that I found in the library's digital archives. I read through the details, no longer as the terrified 22-year-old defendant, but as a cold, analytical investigator. The prosecution's case was built on my motive and Mark's testimony. There was no physical evidence tying me to the scene, but there was also none tying him to it. It was his word against mine, and they chose to believe the charming, grieving friend. Then, I found something. A small detail I had forgotten in the fog of trauma. A side-door neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, had reported hearing an argument. Her testimony was brief and largely dismissed. She couldn't see who was arguing, only that she heard a man and a woman's raised voices. The police had focused on it being me and Sarah. But what if she saw something more? What if they never asked the right questions? Finding her was a long shot. It had been 25 years. I searched public records again, looking for a woman named Eleanor Gable. After days of dead ends, I found a match. She was 84 now, and living in a managed care facility, Golden Years Senior Living, just 20 minutes from my apartment. A new kind of fear gripped me. The fear of hope. What if she remembered nothing? What if she refused to talk to me? Or worse, what if she was the one who misidentified me in the first place? My hands trembled as I rode the bus to the facility. It smelled of antiseptic and overcooked vegetables. I found her name on the resident directory, and was pointed towards a small sunny courtyard. There she was, a frail woman in a wheelchair, a blanket over her lap, watching the birds at a feeder. I approached slowly, my heart in my throat. "Mrs. Gable?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked up, her eyes cloudy with age but still sharp. "Yes. Do I know you?" "My name is Jack Riley," I said, and I saw a flicker of recognition, of distant memory, cross her face. "You were my neighbor a long time ago, on Elm Street." Her brow furrowed. She stared at me, her mind clearly working to connect the name to the face of the young man from the news all those years ago. I held my breath. The entire weight of my past, and the only hope for my future, rested on what this woman would say next. Mrs. Gable's eyes, clouded by age, sharpened with a sudden clarity. "Riley," she repeated, the name a relic from a distant past. "The boy from 2B, the one they took away." "Yes, ma'am," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I was exonerated. I'm a free man." She was wary, her fingers tightening on the armrests of her wheelchair. I didn't push. I just stood there, letting her process the ghost standing before her. I told her I wasn't there to cause trouble, that I just needed to understand what happened that night. I spoke softly, calmly, telling her about seeing Mark, about the life he was living. "I remember the police," she said slowly, her gaze distant. "They asked if I heard you and the girl fighting. I told them I heard an argument. Yes, they seemed satisfied with that. They didn't ask for much more." "Was there more, Mrs. Gable?" I pressed, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Did you see anything?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching a blue jay peck at the bird feeder. "They weren't good listeners," she finally said. "They had their story and just wanted me to fit into it. The argument, it stopped suddenly, and a few minutes later, I saw a man hurry out of the side entrance. It was dark, but he passed right under the security light." My heart stopped. "Did you see his face?" "Not clearly," she admitted. "But it wasn't you. The boy I saw was stockier, and he was frantic. He stumbled near the hedges by the walkway. I remember he dropped something. It made a metallic sound when it hit the pavement. A clink. He scooped it up and ran. A metallic clink. A detail she never told the police because they never asked. A detail that could change everything. I remembered Mark's lighter. It was a silver Zippo. A gift from his father. He was incredibly proud of it, and carried it everywhere, even though he only smoked occasionally. Could that have been it? Hope, dangerous and bright, surged through me. I thanked Mrs. Gable profusely. She simply nodded, a sad, knowing look in her eyes. "I'm sorry, son," she said. "I'm sorry they didn't listen." My next step was a fool's errand, but one I had to take. I went back to my old apartment building. The hedges were long gone, replaced by a concrete patio. For hours, I searched the area, running my hands over the cracks in the pavement, sifting through the dirt where the hedge used to be, looking for a 25-year-old piece of metal. I found nothing but bottle caps and loose change. It was a dead end. Defeated, I realized I would never find the physical proof. The lighter was gone. That left me with only one option, a confession. I couldn't force it out of him. I had to make him give it to me. I had to dismantle the fortress of his life, brick by psychological brick. The campaign began subtly. I created an anonymous email address and sent a message to his company's public contact form. The subject line was Elm Street. The body of the email contained only 2 words: "I know." A few days later, I drove by his house late at night. I took a photo of Sarah, one of the few I still had, faded and creased, and left it on the windshield of his truck. I watched from the shadows as the unraveling began. Through his public social media, I could see the change. The proud, happy posts stopped. I saw him in his driveway one morning, looking over his shoulder, his face pale and drawn. He was arguing with his wife. The cracks were starting to show. The final move had to be precise. I sent him one last anonymous message, this time to his personal email, which I'd gleaned from a data breach registry online. "The dugout, Friday, 8 p.m. We need to talk, or maybe Susan and the police would rather hear it." That Friday, I was at the bar early, sitting in a dark corner booth. I had a small digital audio recorder running in my jacket pocket. It was probably inadmissible in court, but this wasn't for a court. This was for me, for Sarah. Mark arrived right at 8. He looked terrible. He scanned the room, his eyes wild with paranoia, and when he saw me, the color drained from his face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, which in a way he had. He slid into the booth opposite me, his hands trembling.
What is this?
Who are you? He stammered, though we both knew the answer. You know who I am, Mark, I said, my voice low and even. I'm the guy who took the fall for you. He started to bluster, to deny it, but his voice had no conviction. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten him. I just talked. I talked about Sarah, about our plans to move to the coast. I talked about the first year in prison, about the hope dying in my eyes. I mentioned Mrs. Gable, and the man she saw running from the building. I talked about the silver Zippo lighter he used to carry. It was an accident, he finally whispered, his face crumbling. The dam of 25 years of lies broke, and it all came flooding out. He and Sarah had argued.
He'd made a move on her.
And she'd rejected him violently. He pushed her. She fell, hitting her head on the corner of the coffee table.
He panicked.
He saw me as the perfect scapegoat, the jealous boyfriend. He wiped his prints, called the police, and played the part of a lifetime. He sobbed, right there in the middle of the noisy bar, a broken man confessing to a ghost. I let him cry. I didn't feel rage, or even satisfaction. I just felt empty. The recording was safe in my pocket. I stood up from the table. What are you going to do? He choked out, looking up at me, his face a mess of tears and terror. I'm going to live my life, Mark, I said. The one you stole. I walked out of the bar, and didn't look back. I didn't go to the police. Instead, I mailed a copy of the recording to the district attorney's office, and another to a hungry investigative reporter at the city's biggest newspaper. Both were sent anonymously. My name would not be part of the story. My role was over. A week later, the news broke. Prominent local businessman, arrested in connection to 25-year-old cold case. His perfect life shattered into a million pieces. It was a media storm, but I watched it from a distance. I had already packed my bags. The morning the story hit the front page, I was on a bus heading west, the rising sun warming my face through the window. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't running from a past I didn't create, or hiding from a world I didn't understand. I was finally truly free, not just from the prison of steel and stone, but from the prison of his lie. I didn't know where I was going, and for the first time, that felt like a promise, not a problem. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.